A certain man from Cyrene, Simon, the father of Alexander and Rufus, was passing by on his way in from the country, and they forced him to carry the cross. They brought Jesus to the place called Golgotha, which means the place of the skull. Then they offered him wine mixed with myrrh, but he did not take it. And they crucified him. Dividing up his clothes, they cast lots to see what each would get. It was 9 a.m. when they crucified him. The written notice of the charge against him read, "The King of the Jews." They crucified 2 rebels with him, one on his right and one on his left. Those who passed by hurled insults at him, shaking their heads and saying, "So, you who are going to destroy the temple and build it in 3 days, come down from the cross and save yourself." In the same way, the chief priests and the teachers of the law mocked him among themselves. "He saved others," they said, "but he can't save himself. Let this Messiah, this King of Israel, come down now from the cross, that we may see and believe." Those crucified with him also heaped insults on him. At noon, darkness came over the whole land until 3 in the afternoon. And at 3 in the afternoon, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, "Eloi, Eloi, lema sabachthani," which means, my God, why have you forsaken me?" When some of those standing near heard this, they said, "Listen, he's calling Elijah." Someone ran, filled a sponge with wine vinegar, put it on a staff, and offered it to Jesus to drink. "Now leave him alone. Let's see if Elijah comes to take him down," he said. With a loud cry, Jesus breathed his last. The curtain of the temple was torn in 2 from top to bottom, and when the centurion, who stood there in front of Jesus, saw how he died, he said, "Surely this man was the Son of God." Some women were watching from a distance. Among them were Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James the younger and of Joseph, and Salome. In Galilee, these women who had followed him and cared for his needs. Many other women who had come up with him to Jerusalem were also there. After the severe flogging Jesus had received, it is no wonder he is in no fit state to carry his cross. It would probably only have been the cross piece he would have to carry. The upright would have been at the place of execution awaiting him. But Jesus was in too weak a state to carry even that. The Roman centurion in charge of the detail was entitled to press anyone to carry anything for him for a limited distance, and Jesus' crosspiece was covered by that law. The person pressed into service, presumably at random, is named, which is unusual. There is some evidence which suggests that people named in the Gospels, if they're not well-known public figures, were people the readers might have heard about because they were Christian believers, whose personal testimony they might have heard. So it is likely that Simon from Cyrene, modern Libya, and his sons came to believe in Jesus. possibly because of the impression caused by this weak and feeble condemned man. Jesus is brought to the place of execution, called the place of the skull. Skull in Aramaic is Golgotha. In Greek it is Calvarius, which is where we get the name Calvary from. The Greek word Mark uses, kranios, gives us the medical term cranium. Possibly the rocky hill looked a bit like the surface of a skull. Here Jesus is offered drugged wine to dull the pain, but he refuses it. He needs to retain his full faculties to the end, and he needs to endure the full suffering in order to enter fully into the human state. His clothes are shared out and gambled for, in fulfilment of Psalm 22, which was seen by the early church as a prophecy of Christ's death. The original psalmist probably saw it as the lament of a righteous worshipper, but the psalm's wording was so reminiscent of what Jesus actually suffered, the church early on read it as prophesying Jesus' death. Once again, the irony we saw earlier resurfaces, as the title of Jesus above him reads, "The King of the Jews." Pilate, or whoever wrote it, probably intended it sarcastically. But Mark's readers knew what happened a few days later, and knew that what was written in jest was in fact true. Jesus is also crucified between two rebels who took part in the uprising. Jesus was in bad company at the end, as he often was during his life. He came to live amongst all kinds of people, to offer God's salvation to all. The mocking continues. Jesus is mocked as a saviour who can't save himself. Little did his mockers appreciate that it was only by refusing to save himself and being obedient unto death that he could save anybody. Darkness comes over the land at noon. Was this a solar eclipse? If so, there appears to be no other record of it, though in exactly what year Jesus died is debatable. The darkness recalls the plague of darkness in Egypt, and suggests the powers of darkness are in control at this point. Jesus cries out in desperation, my God, why have you forsaken me?" This is yet another reference to Psalm 22, verse 1 of that psalm. Jesus is undergoing the fate humans deserve to its fullest extent. He is bearing human sin and the alienation from God that brings. He bears that for us, in our place. But this is paradoxically the hour of Jesus' final battle with evil, and the hour of his greatest victory. There is a final mocking of his cry, which somebody mishears as a cry for help to Elijah. And then Jesus gives up his life with a loud shout. He did not go out with a whimper, but in control, taking the battle to the enemy, Satan. Then two surprising events are recorded. The curtain in the temple is torn in two. There is some debate about exactly which curtain is meant, but the purpose of whichever curtain must be to emphasize the barrier between God and humans, and God's hiddenness But at Jesus' death, that barrier is broken down, and what was hidden about God is revealed in the love of God shown in Jesus' death. Secondly, the centurion supervising the crucifixion, surely as hard-bitten as an individual as any long-serving non-commissioned officer, declares, "Surely this was the Son of God." Now, quite what that phrase meant to a Gentile soldier is debatable, but there is no doubt what Mark means. He began his gospel with the words, "The beginning of the good news about Jesus the Messiah, the Son of God." And now, as his gospel draws to a close, he tells of how even a hardened Gentile soldier, witnessing how Jesus died, recognized Jesus as God's Son. What the religious and secular leaders of God's people could not recognize, this Gentile soldier did recognize. God's Son, living and dying on earth. Mark's last word is for the women. The male disciples had fled. Mark does not note any of them there at the cross. Those men who are there, chief priests, bystanders, those crucified with him, all mock him. But there are some who gather round the cross, risking the assumption of blame by association, who show nothing but love and grief. They are the women, the ones who had cared for Jesus' daily needs and followed him during his life and travels. They alone stood by him in his last hour. They are the examples Mark holds out for his readers to follow.